Why does modern asphalt constantly deteriorate and require repair, while Roman paving stones have remained intact for 2,000 years? This question troubles anyone who has ever seen the perfectly preserved sections of the Appian Way or the ruins of ancient roads deep in Europe. We are accustomed to considering ourselves at the pinnacle of technological progress, but ancient engineers possess knowledge that we have conveniently forgotten or ignore for the sake of economy. The Roman Empire did not simply build roads. It literally stitched together vast spaces with stone into a single organism capable of functioning for centuries. Their concrete became stronger from contact with seawater, and their straight lines ignored any obstacles in the landscape. It was not just construction, but a manifestation of power expressed in basalt, gravel, and lime mortar. Watch the video to the end to find out how the Romans created an engineering marvel that outlived the empire itself and continues to serve people today. What if I told you that roads were as much a weapon for the Romans as the gladius or the pilum? We are used to thinking of roads solely as a way to get from point A to point B in the shortest amount of time. However, for the Roman Senate, the construction of a highway was an act of aggressive appropriation of territory and affirmation of its absolute domination over nature and conquered peoples. The straight line of the Roman road, cutting through hills and valleys, served as a psychological symbol of the inevitability of Roman order and the inevitability of imperial justice. Local tribes saw these stone scars on the ground as proof that the new masters had come to stay and had no intention of leaving. Every kilometer laid required enormous resources that could not be justified by economics or trade alone. The Romans invested in infrastructure comparable to modern budgets for space programs or nuclear weapons. It was an ideological war, where the main argument was the ability to change physical reality to suit one's needs. Barbarians, accustomed to winding forest paths, were stunned at the sight of legionnaires marching along perfectly flat embankments where once there had been impassable swamps. The road became the physical embodiment of Roman law, which was also straightforward, harsh, and universal for all provinces. That is why the first major roads, such as the Appian Way, were called queens of roads and treated with religious awe. They were built by censors and consuls, whose names were forever immortalized in the names of the roads, guaranteeing the immortality of politics. It was a unique blend of pragmatism and pride that compelled engineers to drill tunnels through rocks instead of simply going around the mountain. Rome did not look for easy ways. It created its own paths, forcing the landscape to submit to the will of man. Such uncompromising design became the foundation of the durability that we marvel at today. Construction did not begin with a shovel, but with the political task of controlling the region. The legions that paved the way were actually engaged in what we would today call terraforming a hostile environment. They cut down forests, drained swamps, and leveled hills, creating a habitat familiar to the Romans. This allowed the empire to project its power thousands of kilometers from the capital with frightening efficiency. Any rebellion could be suppressed in a matter of weeks because the army moved along these arteries at a speed that was incredible for antiquity. It is interesting to note that the Romans made virtually no use of slave labor in the critical areas of strategic road construction. This work was entrusted to legionaries, as it required high qualifications, discipline, and an understanding of engineering tasks. A soldier with a pickaxe was as important to Rome as a soldier with a sword, and often it was the same person. Road construction was a form of military service, endurance training, and a way to keep troops busy in peacetime. It was army discipline that guaranteed the quality of work that modern contractors cannot replicate. Particular attention was paid to how the road fit into the sacred landscape and the boundaries of estates. The Romans were obsessed with demarcation and the clear division of space into their own and foreign. The road served as the main axis of coordinates from which distances to each city and each farm were measured. The milestones set along the way were not just navigational signs, but symbols of state presence. A traveler who stepped on the pavement found himself under the protection and jurisdiction of Roman law. This approach to construction gave rise to a unique phenomenon of cultural assimilation through infrastructure. Cities and settlements began to gravitate toward the road, rebuilding their lives around the rhythm of imperial trade and mail. Local elites quickly realized that proximity to the road meant access to the benefits of civilization and career opportunities. The road became a channel through which the Roman way of life penetrated the most remote corners of Europe and Asia. Thus, stone and mortar did more to unite the empire than the most eloquent orators. The result was a network comparable to the circulatory system of a giant organism. If Rome was the heart, then the roads were the veins through which resources, information, and troops circulated. Stopping this movement would mean the death of the state, so the condition of the road surface was monitored with maniacal thoroughness. Special road curators were responsible for ensuring that chariots could pass without delay in any weather. This system worked so flawlessly that many routes are still in use today. It is difficult to imagine, but the total length of the Roman road network was more than 80,000 kilometers. This distance, enough to circle the Earth twice along the equator, was paved with a stone by hand. The scale of this project is unparalleled in the history of pre-industrial civilizations. We still enjoy the fruits of this titanic labor, often without even suspecting that our highways lie on top of ancient foundations. This makes us think about what we will leave behind for future generations. I would be very interested to hear your opinion on this matter. What do you think about this approach, where a road is built as an ideological monument rather than simply as a means of transportation? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on other engineering marvels of antiquity. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of precision? The main fetish of Roman engineers was the perfect straight line, and they pursued it with fanatical persistence. They despised curves and turns, considering them a sign of weakness and a waste of the traveler's time. To maintain direction over hundreds of kilometers, they used a tool that seems primitive, but worked wonders in skilled hands. This tool was the gramma, a simple cross with plumb lines that became the progenitor of all modern surveying instruments. The work of a surveyor, or grammatic, was one of the most respected and difficult professions in the legion. These specialists marched at the forefront of the army, studying the terrain and mapping out the road of civilization's future advance. The grammatic set up his instrument on high ground, aligned the plumb lines, and sighted the line of sight to the next landmark. Assistants with poles marked points on the ground, creating an invisible string along which construction would later proceed. An error of 1 degree could cause the road to deviate kilometers from its target. The Romans used a system of visual signals and bonfires to chart their course over vast distances. At night, they could use the stars to check that they were heading in the right direction. This obsession with accuracy meant that roads ignored the terrain, climbing steep slopes at incredible angles. For a pedestrian or horseman, this was acceptable, albeit tiring, but it created serious problems for carts. However, military logic demanded the shortest route, and comfort took a back seat. The process of marking out the territory for the road included completely clearing the right-of-way. The width of this zone could reach 60 meters to eliminate the possibility of a sudden ambush from the forest. Trees were cut down, bushes were uprooted, and the top layer of soil was removed down to the solid foundation. This created a kind of exclusion zone where perfect order and visibility reigned. A traveler could see danger long before it approached the road. The thunder allowed not only for the construction of straight lines, but also for the creation of perfectly rectangular grids of cities and camps. The entire Roman civilization was built on right angles, and the road was the axis of this rectangular universe. When the road approached a city, it became its main street, the Decumanus, setting the rhythm for the entire urban development. This created an amazing sense of uniformity. Wherever a Roman was, he was always in familiar surroundings. Engineers carefully studied the properties of the soil before starting construction, conducting a real geological survey. They looked for aquifers, determined the density of the soil, and checked for the presence of rock. If the soil was too soft, it was reinforced with charred oak piles or replaced entirely. No compromises with nature were allowed if they threatened the stability of the structure. The Romans built for centuries, and the foundation was the key to this longevity. Sometimes the desire for a straight line forced them to undertake colossal earthworks. There are known cases when entire hills were cut down and ravines were filled with millions of cubic meters of soil. These artificial changes to the landscape are still visible on satellite images today, 2,000 years later. It was a demonstration that there were no barriers for Rome, neither political nor geographical. However, even the Romans were sometimes forced to retreat in the face of insurmountable obstacles. In the high mountains, roads turned into serpentines carved directly into the rock. But even here, engineers tried to maintain the gentlest slopes and wide turning radii possible. The art of compromise between ideal geometry and reality was the pinnacle of a grammatic's skill. Each such section required individual calculations and non-standard solutions. The surveyor's tools were supplemented by a horobatus, a long water level for determining slopes. With its help, they created drainage systems, without which any road would quickly turn into a swamp. Water was the main enemy of roads, and the Romans knew how to fight it better than anyone else. The ditches along the sides and the profile of the road surface were calculated so that raindrops would roll off instantly. The work of the Grammations laid the foundation for all European cartography and the road network. Many modern highways follow the routes laid out by these people with the help of a wooden cross and a rope. The accuracy of their measurements amazes modern surveyors armed with lasers and satellites. Are you ready to find out what the Romans hid under the top layer of stones and why it is more important than the paving stones themselves? What you have never seen is hidden deep underground, beneath the feet of tourists. The secret of Roman roads lies not in the stones that people walk on, but in what lies beneath them. A Roman road is not just a path paved with cobblestones, but a complex engineering structure that goes 1.5 meters deep into the ground. It was a real wall laid on its side, consisting of many carefully selected layers. This design provided drainage, shock absorption, and incredible load-bearing capacity. It all started with digging a trench called a fossa until the builders reached solid rock or dense soil. The bottom of this trench was carefully compacted, creating a level surface for future construction. The first layer was laid with statumen, large stones the size of a melon, which served as the foundation for the entire structure. They not only supported the weight, but also allowed water to drain freely into the soil, preventing erosion. The craftsmen fitted these stones by hand so that they lay as tightly as possible. On top of the large stones, a layer of rudis was poured, a mixture of smaller gravel, broken bricks, and a special mortar. This layer was carefully tamped down, turning it into a monolithic mass capable of withstanding enormous loads. Pozzolan, volcanic ash that made the mortar incredibly strong and water-resistant, was often added to this layer. In fact, the Romans poured concrete over the road, which only became stronger over time. The thickness of this layer could reach 0.5 meter, creating an indestructible cushion. The third layer was the nucleus, fine gravel, sand, or brick chips, also bound with cement mortar. This layer was softer and more elastic, serving to distribute the load from wheels and hooves across the entire surface of the base. The nucleus was leveled with particular care, forming the profile of the future road. It was on this layer that the final surface was laid, and its quality determined how smooth the road would be. Only on top of this was laid what we are used to seeing, the crust, or top surface. These were massive polygonal slabs of basalt or lava, perfectly fitted together. The joints between the stones were so thin that it was impossible to insert a knife blade into them. The upper surface of the stones was slightly convex so that water would flow to the sides where drainage ditches were dug. It is important to note that the Romans used local materials, adapting the technology to the specific region. In Britain, they used gravel and flint. In Italy, volcanic rocks, and in Africa, limestone. But the layer cake principle remained the same everywhere, from foggy Albion to the deserts of Syria. This standardization allowed any engineer sent from Rome to immediately get to work. The genius of the system lay in its versatility and adaptability. This multi-layered construction worked as an ideal shock absorber, dampening vibrations from heavy carts. If the stones had simply been laid on the ground, the road would have broken down in a couple of years under the weight of cargo and legions. But the Roman road breathed and sprang, maintaining its integrity for centuries. It was an engineering solution that was 2,000 years ahead of its time. In addition, The multi-layered structure solved the main problem of road construction, the fight against freezing and thawing of water in the ground. The drainage properties of the lower layers prevented water from stagnating and breaking the road surface when it froze. The Romans understood the physics of the processes intuitively and fought the cause of destruction, not its consequences. Modern roads often collapse precisely because of poor drainage, which builders have forgotten about. The final touch was the curbstones, which held the entire structure together at the edges, preventing the layers from spreading. They protruded above the surface and served as a kind of guide for chariots. Along the roads, they also built footpaths of compacted soil for those who could not afford a cart or a horse. Roman roads were democratic and open to everyone, from senators to ordinary travelers. It was this hidden complexity and labor intensity that made Roman roads eternal. We only see the tip of the iceberg, but the real power of Rome is hidden underground, in millions of tons of rubble and concrete. Don't forget to like this video if you are impressed by this engineering feat. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos about life in ancient Rome. Guess what happened next when the straight line of the Roman road ran into a raging river? The Romans did not look for fords or make detours. They built bridges that became the benchmark for reliability. The Roman Arch Bridge is a triumph of mathematics and structural engineering embodied in stone. They realized that an arch allows large spans to be covered, using the weight of the stone itself to strengthen the structure. The more pressure you put on the arch from above, the stronger it becomes, compressing the stones together. The most ambitious project was Trajan's bridge across the Danube, built by the famous architect Apollodorus of Damascus. More than a kilometer long, it stood on 20 massive stone piers erected directly in the bed of the mighty river. To build the supports, the Romans used caissons, wooden boxes that were lowered into the water, drained, and used to build the foundation inside. This technology bordered on fantasy for the barbarian peoples who watched the construction from the other bank. The bridge became not just a crossing, but a symbol that the Danube was no longer the border of the Roman world. The Romans used a special waterproof concrete for the underwater parts of their bridges. The secret was the addition of pozzolan, which reacted chemically with water and eventually became harder than stone. Many of these supports are still standing today, having withstood the pressure of water and ice for 2 millennia. Modern concrete begins to deteriorate in water after 50 to 100 years. But Roman concrete lasts forever. Scientists have only recently begun to unravel the chemical composition of this ancient wonder material. In mountainous areas, engineers built viaducts, throwing roads across deep gorges. The Pont de Gard Bridge in France, part of an aqueduct, demonstrates the elegance and power of the Roman multi-tiered arch. The stones were laid without mortar, held together only by their precise fit and their own weight. The blocks were cut with such precision that there is not even a millimeter gap between them. These structures withstood earthquakes and floods, remaining intact. When building bridges, the Romans often diverted the riverbed to the side so they could work on dry ground. This required digging huge diversion channels and building temporary dams. The scale of the earthworks in preparation for the construction of a bridge often exceeded the construction of the crossing itself. But for the legionaries, there was no such thing as impossible when it came to the emperor's orders. The width of the bridges usually corresponded to the width of the road, so as not to create bottlenecks for the movement of troops. Triumphal arches or altars were often installed on bridges, reminding travelers who they had to thank for being able to cross to the other side. These were not just utilitarian structures, but monuments to imperial glory. Each bridge was a decoration of the landscape and the pride of the engineer. To overcome mountain passes, the Romans cut tunnels into the rocks using a method of heating and rapidly cooling the stone. The rock was heated with fires and then doused with vinegar or cold water, causing it to crack. The most famous tunnel, the Grotto of the Vizier in the Alps, was several hundred meters long and allowed caravans to pass through the mountain. The work was carried out from both sides, and the accuracy with which the tunnelers met was remarkable. The safety of the crossings was ensured not only by the strength of the stone, but also by the garrisons guarding the bridges. The strategic importance of bridges was enormous, and their destruction could stop an entire army. Therefore, bridges were built with a margin of strength designed to withstand the passage of elephants and siege engines. Many Roman bridges are still used for vehicular traffic. withstanding loads for which they were not designed. Sometimes the Romans built pontoon bridges for temporary crossings during military campaigns. Ships were tied together, a wooden deck was laid on top, and the structure was secured with anchors. Caesar's famous bridge across the Rhine was built in just 10 days, terrifying the Germans with the speed of Roman engineering. After demonstrating its power, the bridge was dismantled, showing that Rome could come and go as it pleased. The Romans' ability to overcome water barriers made their road network continuous and pervasive. Rivers ceased to be borders and became internal arteries of the empire. In the next chapter, you will learn how they coped with the task of quickly transmitting information along these endless roads. Having created an ideal road network, Rome organized the most sophisticated logistics service of the ancient world, the cursus publicus. It was a state postal and transport system that operated with clockwork precision. Its main task was to enable the emperor to govern vast territories in real time. Without this system, orders would take months to reach their destination, and rebellions would have time to flare up to uncontrollable proportions. Along all the main roads, at a distance of 1 day's journey from each other, there were mansio, state-owned hotels and rest stations. Here, officials and couriers could find lodging, food, baths, and most importantly, fresh horses. These stations were a kind of communication hub where messengers from different parts of the world crossed paths. Mansi were maintained by local taxes, which often caused discontent among the population, but ensured smooth operation. Between the mansio, at a distance of every 10-15 kilometers, there were mutario, horse-changing stations. A courier could rush into the station, switch to a fresh horse, and continue on his way without wasting a minute. Thanks to this system, urgent messages could travel up to 80 kilometers a day, and in emergencies, up to 100 kilometers. For the ancient world, this was the speed of light. Only those with special permission, a diploma signed by the emperor or governor, could use the services of the cursus publicus. It was a scroll that gave the right to use government horses and inns. Abuse of this right was severely punished, as the system's resources were limited and expensive. Private individuals, even very wealthy ones, were forced to travel more slowly and at their own expense. The system was divided into fast transport, horses and mules for couriers, and slow transport, oxen and heavy carts for cargo. Heavy loads, such as marble for columns or grain for the legions, moved slowly but surely. Logistics allowed Rome to build cities in the desert and feed the capital's population of millions. The entire economy of the empire depended on the rhythmic movement of carts along the pavement. Veterinarians and grooms employed by the state monitored the condition of the stations and the health of the animals. Horses were a valuable resource and were cared for, regularly changed and given rest. The Romans understood perfectly well that an overworked horse meant an undelivered order and a lost battle. It was a transport service industry comparable to modern networks of gas stations and services. An important element of speed was the roads themselves, with their hard surfaces. In any weather, rain or slush, the wheels did not get stuck in the mud, and the hooves trod firmly on stone or gravel. This made the traffic schedule predictable all year round. The muddy season, which halted wars and trade among the barbarians, simply did not exist for the Romans. Emperor Augustus, the creator of this system, understood that information is power. Receiving reports of a rebellion on the border before the rebels had time to gather their forces, he could suppress it with minimal resources. The cursus publicus was the nervous system of the empire, transmitting impulses from the head to the limbs. It was this system that allowed Rome to remain united for centuries. Of course, the system was incredibly expensive, maintaining thousands of horses, repairing buildings, and paying staff placed a heavy burden on the treasury. In the late period of the empire, the cost of the cursus publicus became one of the causes of the financial crisis. But while the system worked, Rome was invincible, outpacing its enemies in speed of response. This state-run speed machine set a standard that Europe was only able to match in the 19th century with the advent of railways. A Roman courier could travel from London to Rome faster than a Victorian mail coach. This logistical achievement was no less impressive than the roads themselves. What if I told you that the width of a Roman road was dictated not by convenience, but by war? The standard width of the roadbed was often calculated so that 6 legionaries could march in a row without breaking formation. The road was an extension of the parade ground, a tool for deploying the military machine in any terrain. The Roman army was the only one in the world that went into battle not tired from marching through mud, but alert and ready for battle. The legion's ability to march 30 kilometers a day in full gear was ensured precisely by the quality of the road surface. The smooth surface allowed them to transport siege engines, food supplies, and tents. The Romans fought with a level of comfort unavailable to their enemies, who were at the mercy of the weather and the trails. Logistics defeated the bravery of the barbarians even before the battle began. Fortified camps were built along the roads, many of which later grew into cities. Castra, Roman military camps, were always located so as to have quick access to the road. This allowed the garrison to respond instantly to threats and come to the aid of their neighbors. The road connected individual forts into a single defensive line that was impossible to break through unnoticed. Roman engineers in the legions were an elite group capable of building roads under enemy fire. During the conquest of Gaul, Caesar used construction as a tactical maneuver, cutting off enemies from resources and driving them into traps. The road was a noose that slowly tightened around the necks of the rebellious tribes. The barbarians understood that if the Romans began to build a road, their freedom would come to an end. The roadsides were cleared to prevent ambushes, which changed the tactics of guerrilla warfare. Attacking a column marching in open space with solid ground underfoot was suicide. Legionnaires could quickly regroup into a turtle battle formation or deploy their front. The road gave the defending side a tactical advantage. Interestingly, when retreating, the Romans could destroy their own roads to slow down the enemy. They dismantled bridges and dug up embankments, turning their creations into obstacles. But this happened rarely. More often, the road served as a vector of expansion, directed only forward. It was an arrow shot from Rome into the heart of the barbarian world. Thanks to the roads, Rome could transfer legions from the Rhine border to the Danube or Syrian borders in the shortest possible time. This mobility allowed the empire to maintain a relatively small army to guard vast territories. The same legion could fight in the forests of Germany and the sands of Parthia in the same year. The versatility of the soldier was complemented by the versatility of the road. The military importance of roads was so great that they were guarded by special units of beneficiaries. These were road police posts that checked documents and cargo. They made sure that enemy spies or smugglers did not use the road. The road was a restricted area, a zone of special attention for the special services. Even after the collapse of the empire, the roads continued to serve the military purposes of the conquerors. The Goths, Huns, and Vandals used them, exploiting the Roman infrastructure to destroy Rome. The irony of fate was that the instrument of empire building became the instrument of its demise. The enemies came along the same roads that the legions had left. But while the legions stood guard, the road was a symbol of security. The inhabitants of the provinces knew that if they saw a Roman road, help would come. Did you know that the Romans used roads not only for the living, but also for the dead? In the next chapter, you will learn how roads were transformed into cities of the dead. Roman laws strictly prohibited burying the dead within the city limits for sanitary and religious reasons. Therefore, just outside the city gates, another world began. A world of monumental tombs and mausoleums lining the road. Entering any large Roman city, and especially Rome itself, via the Appian Way, was like traveling through a necropolis. It was a display of vanity, where the dead competed with the living in luxury. Every wealthy family sought to build a tomb as close to the road as possible so that travelers could see the names and titles of the deceased. Epitaphs often addressed passers-by, "Stop, traveler, and read." It was believed that as long as a person's name was read and spoken aloud, they would live on in memory. The road, with its endless stream of people, was the best place to ensure such immortality. These monuments were not just graves, but true architectural masterpieces. They copied temples, towers, pyramids, and even houses. Some were decorated with statues, bas-reliefs depicting scenes from the life of the deceased, and detailed lists of his services to the state. For historians, these stones have become an invaluable encyclopedia of Roman life, telling us about the careers, families, and values of that era. Among the tombs of the nobility, one could also find modest columbaria for freedmen or poor people who joined funeral clubs. Space by the road was expensive, so the further away from the city, the more modest the monuments became. This created a kind of social map of society stretched out in a line. Even after death, the hierarchy remained and was clearly demonstrated to everyone entering. The Road of the Dead was not a gloomy place. Life was bustling here. Thieves tried to rob rich graves. Priestesses of love sought clients, and beggars asked for alms from those who came to commemorate their relatives. The Romans had a pragmatic attitude toward death, and living alongside their ancestors did not frighten them, but rather inspired respect for their family history. Tombs were often used as landmarks for meeting places. Some mausoleums were so huge that in the Middle Ages, they were converted into fortresses and castles. The famous mausoleum of Cecilia Metella on the Appian Way was turned into a fort that controlled traffic. The strength of Roman concrete and stone served the new owners, albeit in a completely different capacity. Thus, the dead continued to influence the affairs of the living centuries later. The monuments along the road also served an educational function. Young Romans passing by the graves of great commanders and consuls were inspired by their example. It was a walk of fame, clearly demonstrating that serving Rome leads to eternal memory. Ideology worked even here, turning grief into patriotism. Interestingly, many inscriptions contain curses against those who dare to desecrate a grave or even simply relieve themselves on a monument. This suggests that vandalism and disrespect were also a problem in those days. The protection of the memory of ancestors was entrusted to the gods and the conscience of passers-by, as the guards could not keep track of every kilometer. Over time, the necropolises grew so large that the roads turned into narrow corridors among the stones. This created a unique atmosphere of solemnity at the entrance to the capital of the world. Travelers could physically feel the weight of history and the greatness of a people who so honor their departed. Today, the ruins of these tombs are the most romantic reminder of past greatness. They stand, half-ruined and covered in ivy, along the same roads that cars now drive on. The dead continue to watch us, reminding us of the transience of life and the eternity of stone. The roads were built by the military but paid for by merchants. It was trade that turned military routes into economic arteries through which the empire's wealth flowed. The Roman road reduced the cost of land transport, making it profitable to deliver goods that previously never left their region. Wine from Italy, oil from Spain, grain from Egypt, and ceramics from Gaul filled the markets. Wagons loaded with amphorae creaked along the cobblestones day and night. The standardization of the track gauge, which was often specially carved into stone on difficult sections, allowed for the use of uniform types of transport. A heavy four-wheeled Rita could carry up to half a ton of cargo, while a light two-wheeled Sisyphus served as a taxi for the rapid delivery of passengers. The development of roads spurred the development of wheeled transport and harnesses. Thanks to the roads, regional specialization emerged. Farmers did not need to grow everything in order to survive. They could focus on producing the best olive oil, knowing that the road would allow them to sell it hundreds of kilometers away. This led to an economic boom and increased prosperity in the provinces. The market became global in scale in the ancient world. The transportation of building materials was of great importance. Marble, granite, and porphyry were transported from quarries to the sites of grandiose construction projects. The columns of the Pantheon were carved in Egypt, transported down the Nile, across the sea, and then along roads to Rome. Without reliable roads, such a logistical feat would have been impossible. Roads literally built imperial architecture. Trade stimulated the development of services. Along the roads, smithies, wheel repair shops, warehouses, and markets sprang up. Entire settlements formed around post stations, living off the transit trade. The road fed millions of people, not only farmers, but also craftsmen. It was the first example of a roadside economy in history. However, land transport was still expensive compared to sea transport. Therefore, roads were mainly used for small quantities of expensive goods or for delivery to areas that ships could not reach. But it was the roads that provided the last mile of delivery, connecting ports with the interior of the continent. The symbiosis of sea and land made the economy efficient. Customs posts at provincial borders collected duties from merchants, replenishing the treasury. Roads allowed the state to control the flow of goods and tax them effectively. Smuggling around roads was difficult and dangerous, so most people preferred to pay and travel along safe routes. The fiscal function of roads was no less important than their transport function. The spread of Roman coins as a universal currency also followed the roads. Money flowed towards goods, unifying prices and economic relations. A merchant from Syria could pay with a dinar in Britain, and his coin would be accepted without question. This created a single economic space. Roads also facilitated the migration of labor. Craftsmen and builders moved to where their skills were in demand. Cities grew and prospered thanks to the influx of fresh blood and ideas. The mobility of the population was unprecedented for that era. Ultimately, roads made the Roman Empire the first global economy in history. The level of integration was such that the collapse of the road network in the Dark Ages set the European economy back 1,000 years. We are only now beginning to understand the scale of the economic machine that Roman engineers set in motion. Despite the power of Roman order, traveling on the road was not always a safe journey. Beyond the reach of garrisons and cities, travelers were left alone to face danger. Bandits, or latrones, were the scourge of ancient roads. They lay in wait in remote locations, robbing merchants and kidnapping people for ransom or to sell them into slavery. Wealthy travelers never set out without armed guards. Private mercenaries and gladiators often worked as bodyguards in caravans. The poor traveled in large groups, hoping that their numbers would deter bandits. A lone traveler was easy prey, and many disappeared without a trace, falling victim to roadside crime. The authorities fought banditry ruthlessly. Captured robbers were often crucified right along the road, at the scene of the crime. The sight of crosses with dying criminals was intended to intimidate others and demonstrate the inevitability of punishment. It was a grim decoration of the landscape, a reminder that the law was harsh. But it was not only people who posed a threat. Wild animals, wolves and bears, often came out onto the roads, especially in wooded provinces. Spending the night under the open sky was risky, so travelers sought to reach shelter before sunset. It was the demand for safety that gave rise to a network of private inns, caudinas. The reputation of these establishments was, to put it mildly, questionable. Roman authors often describe innkeepers as swindlers who diluted wine with water and cheated their guests. Bedbugs, poor food, and noisy companies were the norm. Often the owners themselves were in cahoots with robbers, leading them to wealthy guests. However, travelers had no choice. The inn provided a roof over their heads and walls to protect them from the night. Here they could find out the news, meet fellow travelers, and simply catch their breath. The walls of taverns were often covered with graffiti. Guy was here, the owner is a thief, mule for sale. It was a kind of guest book and complaint book of antiquity. For the elite, there were more respectable places, or they stayed in the homes of friends and clients under a system of hospitality. Having an extensive network of friends in different cities was vital for comfortable travel. A letter of recommendation opened the doors of wealthy villas, where one could relax in comfort unavailable at a roadside tavern. The road police we mentioned could not be everywhere. Therefore, safety often depended on the vigilance of the traveler himself. A weapon under a cloak was as essential an attribute of a tourist as a flask of water. Travel was an adventure in the full sense of the word, with risk to life. There were also guidebooks, itineraries, lists of stations and distances between them. They helped plan the route so as not to end up in the forest at night. Knowledge of the road was the key to survival. Experienced travelers knew where to eat safely and which sections were best to gallop through. Despite all the dangers, people continued to travel. The thirst for profit, official duty, or simple curiosity drove them along the roads of the empire. The Roman world was a world in motion, and fear of the road could not stop this flow of life. Rome fell, but the roads remained. When the legions left and the empire fell apart, the barbarian kingdoms inherited an infrastructure that they could neither maintain nor replicate. Stone proved stronger than the civilization that created it. In the Middle Ages, Roman roads continued to serve as the main thoroughfares of Europe, although no one maintained them anymore. Local residents often dismantled the roads for building materials. Cobblestones were used to build houses, churches, and castles. Magnificent engineering structures were turned into quarries. But the quality of construction was such that even after centuries of vandalism, the foundations of the roads remained intact. Many modern European highways lie directly on Roman foundations. The church used the roads to spread Christianity, just as emperors had previously used them to spread their power. Pilgrims walked on the same stones as legionnaires, heading for Rome or Jerusalem. The roads preserved the cultural unity of Europe, even in the darkest times of fragmentation. Legends about the builders of these roads changed. People forgot the engineers and began to attribute the creation of giant embankments and bridges to giants, wizards, or even the devil. The devil's bridges in Europe are often Roman structures that seem supernatural to medieval people. Technology turned into magic. During the Renaissance, interest in antiquity led to a renewed focus on construction methods. Engineers began to study the ruins, trying to unravel the secrets of Roman concrete and planning. Napoleon Bonaparte, dreaming of a new empire, actively restored Roman roads, understanding their strategic importance. Today, archaeologists find sections of roads in the most unexpected places, under supermarket parking lots, in basements of houses, and in the middle of fields. Every meter of paving stones uncovered is a window into the past, allowing us to touch history. We see the tracks of chariots carved into the stone and can imagine the hustle and bustle of the ancient world. The durability of Roman roads has become a silent rebuke to modern builders. They remind us that it is possible to build not for a season, but for centuries. The secret was not only in technology, but also in the attitude towards the work. For the Romans, the road was a matter of honor and glory, not just a way to spend the budget. The paradox is that many Roman roads are still usable today. If you remove the layer of asphalt and dirt, you will often find the very summa crusta underneath, ready to withstand the weight of a tank. This is the best proof that true quality is not afraid of time. The Roman road is a monument to human perseverance and the desire to bring order to the chaos of nature. It has outlived its creators, their gods, and their laws. It has become part of the landscape, as natural as a river or a mountain. And perhaps in 1,000 years, when our modern highways have turned to dust, somewhere in the wilderness, the straight, arrow-like trace of a Roman road will still be visible, leading beyond the horizon. We have seen how a combination of ingenious engineering, strict discipline, and imperial ambitions created a network that has survived for millennia. The Romans did not just throw stones into the mud, they changed the world to suit themselves, creating the infrastructure that shaped modern Europe. Their experience teaches us that real investment is investment in foundations that will stand the test of time. What do you think? Could modern engineers build something similar using the same materials and tools? Or have we lost something important in the pursuit of speed and cheapness? Write your thoughts in the comments. It will be very interesting to read. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future journeys into the history of great civilizations.